Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for attending today's meeting, the second meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. My name is Councillor Terry Fox. I am the leader of the Council and Chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. The meeting today is open to the public, and we have received 9 questions and 1 petition from the members of the public. A set of questions within them 9 have been received late, and the questioner is not in attendance. So what I presume to do will be that we will just send the answers, written answers, to those questions. They'll be posted with the minutes anyway, so people can read at their leisure. Please can I request that mobile telephones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the town hall staff themselves. The assembly point is Tudor Square, and everybody knows I love Tudor Square, so I'll be in there if there is a fire. Ask each and Strategy and Resources committee member and officers in turn to introduce themselves. So I'll start with that one. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Martin Smith, Dore and Totley Ward, Chair of the Economic Development and Skills Committee.
Cheers, Martin. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Richard Williams, Ward Member for Stannington and Chair of the Communities Park and Leisure Committee.
Thank you. Shafak.
Shafak Mohammed, Leader of the Lib Dem Group.
Thank you, Joe.
Hi, Councillor Joe Watson, Chair of Waste and CC, Member for Dore and Totley.
Thank you. Julie.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon. Councillor Julie Greycoat, Member for Stocksbridge and Upper Don and Co-Chair of Transport, Regeneration and Climate.
Thanks, Julie. Douglas.
Afternoon. Yeah, Douglas Johnson, Councillor for City Ward, Leader of the Green Group and Chair of Housing.
Thanks, Douglas. Mick.
Councillor McRooney, Co-Chair of the Education, Children and Families Policy Committee and Member for Woodhouse.
Cheers, Mick. Paul.
Good afternoon. My name is Councillor Paul Wood and I am the elected member for the Woodhouse Ward.
Thanks, Paul. And Angela.
Good afternoon. Councillor Angela Ardencio, Councillor for Broomhill and Sharrowville and Co-Chair of Adult Health and Social Care.
Thank you. Angela. Julian.
Gillian Duckworth, Director of Legal and Governance.
James.
Afternoon, James Henderson, Director of Policy, Performance and Communications.
You.
Hi, Eugene Walker, Executive Director of Resources.
Kate.
Hi, Kate Joseph, Chief Executive.
Thanks, Kate. And Rachel.
Rachel Marshall, Principal Committee Secretary.
Thank you very much, everyone. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Brian Lodge. Is there any more apologies? No, thank you. Item 3, exclusion of public and press. There are no items. And if you do hear a disturbance in the background, I think we're having some work done, or the removal of work within our reception area. So apologies if there's any disturbance in the background. It was, yeah. Item 4 is the declaration of interest. Just on this point, is there any members who wish to declare any interest in any of the agenda? Julie?
Just for information and completeness, page 3 of the forward plan, the Clough Dyke improvement works, that's in my ward, and I have been involved with residents and issues in relation to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Julie. Any more? If not, thank you very much. Item 5, minutes of previous meeting. Can we agree those minutes? Agreed. Thank you. We will be on the items today. We will have a change of order to the agenda. So, sorry, members, for this change. But item number 15, Housing Support Fund. After agenda item 12, the cost of living crisis. There's nothing else that we need to know about that, but we'll take the 2. Next item is public questions and petitions. We received 1 petition from Ibra Hussain. He's not come today, so we'll get him a reply. Or George, have you got a short line you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'm happy to say that we are aware of the petition. We are working on a proposal for a surcharge on Hackney carriages, recognising that on the one hand, obviously, Hackney carriages are a vital part of the transport network and need to be reasonably affordable, but equally that it has to be a viable business for Hackney carriage drivers. And there is a precedent to put on a surcharge at times of high fuel prices. What we would ask the petitioner to do, or to the trade to do, is to come to us with some calculations as to what they think that surcharge ought to be numerically and at what threshold of fuel price it ought to apply. And we can take that away, and we're minded to support that. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. So we go to public questions. First question today is from Nigel Slack. Nigel, I'd like to meet you here today.
Thank you, Chair. I have asked many questions of Council over the last 12 years, and I've almost always tried to pitch those in a positive and helpful way. This is therefore one of the most difficult questions I've ever laid before you. Recent events around the actions and the disciplinary disposition of the Chief Executive of this Council have been deeply troubling to colleagues in the community and to many others. The actions for which the Chief Exec was recently called to account drove a coach and horses through the Nolan principles of public life. The fact that city councillors and so-called business leaders in the city were prepared to ignore those principles for the sake of expediency is, in my view, a stain on the reputation of this city and of this council. There is an implicit precedent being set that the Nolan principles are somehow malleable and can be ignored by any member of this council, elected or employed, in the right circumstances. Adherence to the principles should not be a matter of expediency, not a matter of what suits either the power brokers of the business world or the political leaders within the administration. They are a definition of a moral way of working and behaving in public life, and an ethical framework for this council. Sheffield has now lost its moral compass. We are all of us human, and we all make mistakes. But the deliberate flouting of any one element of the Nolan principles diminishes them all. And, in choosing to be loyal to the diktat of the Cabinet Office, rather than being honest and open with her current employer, does not reflect well on her judgment or her loyalty to the city. Questions need to be asked, but the cloak of secrecy around the issues and the investigations in this matter make it almost impossible to get the answers needed. Rumours abound and are problematic, and trust in the council is once more being lost. I do not see any way in which the Chief Exec can reclaim her integrity, her reputation, or the city's trust. And I believe her position will only become more and more untenable unless there is greater transparency over the report and the disciplinary decision. Will this committee therefore reinforce this council's commitment to the Nolan principles as the ethical framework of the council? And will this committee call on the Chief Exec to reconsider her position and take the steps she should have taken in the first instance by resigning? Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel, and thanks for the way that you kind of framed those questions. What I will say is that Kate has apologised publicly. She has faced questions from the media and from members and staff, and obviously the public. The council formed a committee. That committee followed a process that would, in any other employment rights, be followed. The committee considered many issues, including the Nolan principles, and came to a decision. That decision I respect, And that is the decision of which I released the statement, my public statement, and that is where we are. The committee was made up by experienced and senior members of this council who took their duty, and I want to publicly, again, take the opportunity to thank those members who came to that decision. And as far as I'm concerned, we will move forward, and the Chief Exec has said to members across the council that if they want to go and have a one-to-one with her, they can. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll stand by the Chief Exec's statement and my statement, and we've made a joint statement also. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you. Can we have our next public question from Robin Hughes? Robin?
Thank you, Chair. So here's my question. So this committee will consider a proposal to demolish the former John Lewis car park. This may seem premature, as the Council's application for a certificate of immunity from listing has not yet been decided. It could be misunderstood as second-guessing that decision, even though it may be sensible to secure a budget. The claim that clearing a site attracts development, made in the report, is also questionable. Rushing to demolition has often left unsightly vacant plots for many years, for example, Sheaf House, Dyson House, and the Castle Market buildings. Also, the Council benefits from professional and expert officers, but years of savage cuts have depleted the resources available to assess historic and architectural significance. The very limited assessment of the John Lewis building is a recent illustration. The Council does not seem to have realised the significance of what it had. There are experts in the city, including the Council's own Conservation Advisory Group, ready to support officers on a voluntary basis and help to ensure that the city makes the most of its rich and varied historic environment. So, these are the questions. 1. If this committee approves the demolition proposal, will you require that any planning application or other preparation for demolition occurs only after the listing status of the building has been determined and after there is a firm and financed proposal for whatever will replace it? And 2, how best can local expert volunteers help the Council to assess the historic and architectural significance of assets in advance of proposals being made? Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks for those questions. I'll take them in two parts if I can. So, no decision has been taken to demolish the John Lewis car park. At this stage, this committee is being asked to consider the outlined business case only to allocate funding to enable tendering and survey and the feasibility work to be undertaken. If it is decided to proceed with demolition of the car park, a planning application will be submitted. In assessing the planning application, where consideration will be given to the building's historic character, significance, and setting and drawing on the expertise from Council's conservation and urban design teams, and in consultation with the statutory consultees such as Historic England. But as I say, we're only making a decision on the allowing the money or to be financed for the outline business case. So thank you very much. Thanks for those, and we'll note those points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have 5 questions, which I said at the beginning of the meeting, from Ruth Hubbard, who's not here, unfortunately, to ask those questions. We have got answers. We will get them out to Ruth. What I will say, because maybe one of the questions stroke answers will probably be out of time, which is around the tram lines and the re-entry debacle that's ongoing. I've got to honestly say, I've just find the decision ridiculous. I've been to events around the country, around Europe, and I've never been to one where you couldn't leave the event to come back in. For over a weekend. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But we will send these replies out. And I know Councillor George, Lynn Summers is on the case. Yeah, I'm being a strong voice for this. So anyway, thank you, Ruth. We'll get them out. Bridget Ingle has got a question, and we'll use the same principle to Bridget. So thanks to those. That's the end of public questions. Can I thank everybody for coming today to ask those questions. We move on now to item 7, the retirement of staff. You will have in front of yourselves a list of staff and a recommendation for the years of service, and I can say there's some years of service to the members of staff. I'd also just like to say a big thank you, and I don't like really pulling people out on here, but there are names on here who I have over my 20 years had dealings with, who have been fair and upfront officers, sometimes not giving us the replies that we may want to have, but to say that they've given us them in an honest and thankful way. And also, I know it's Angela Hall on here as a convener who has had to deal with many challenges, so a big thank you to Angela for her years of service. So can we note those recommendations and convey our thanks for the work and the role? Thank you. Thanks everybody for that. Next item is item 8, which is the work programme. There are a list of work programme for this committee in front. There are a set of recommendations. Is there any questions or comments on the work programme? If not, can we agree those? Thank you. Straightforward then to item 9, which is the priorities away ahead. We've got in the report a theme and a quite large report regarding setting out the way forward with our themes. Is there any questions or comments on these? Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have a comment on it's on the supplementary papers at page 7. Again, we had this discussion at the last meeting. We talk about improving the services that are underperforming, and again we have the form of words, the agreed areas of poor performance. And my question is, at what point are we going to agree what those areas are? Because it's all very well to say some of our services are underperforming and we're going to fix it, but if we can't admit which services they are, then I don't have confidence. I don't think the public can have confidence that we're actually going to do that. So again, I will give you a short list that has some of those areas, and I'm sure other members have others to add. Housing repairs, council tax collection, the contact centre, street environment, I think is one of them, is under my committee, and we will certainly be looking at that, whether it's agreed or not. But I do think it is probably one of the agreed areas of poor performance if we are to reach that agreement. So can I just, I don't know what the process, can I have some advice please, what the process is? Are we going to agree what these areas are? And so that we can therefore task the policy committees, or however we go about it, start doing the work on getting those services back up to speed. Thank you.
Thanks, I'll bring James in a moment, but because we didn't want to have this as a large prescriptive list of where we want it, the idea is that we will bring them through on papers to CMT, etc., to distribute to those committees that may be looking at, and therefore chairs, vice chairs will have a real opportunity to put forward what their members of their committees also feel is a challenge as well on that to be looking at. I would expect housing to put housing repairs straight in and bring that in. James, I'll just bring you in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Otten. Yes, the work programme for the 30th of August meeting of this committee includes a proposal to bring forward a report on the organisation's overall performance, to brief this committee on key issues of underperformance, but also where we have had good success in the last year in terms of improving performance, and there are a number of significant areas in that category as well. So we're proposing to bring that forward for members to discuss at the next meeting, and as Councillor Fox has said, that can then form the basis for individual committees to look in more detail at particular issues that might affect the areas that they've got responsibility for. So I think that's the process that will hopefully bring that forward in a structured way so that you can see the entirety of the performance picture, and then, as I say, take that into the individual committees. We will also, accompanying that report, propose to bring forward a report that sets out the progress that we've made against the ambitions and objectives that were set out in the one-year plan from last year, and a first draft of the corporate plan for the organisation. So there'll be a package of papers that brings all of that together at the next committee meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Douglas.
Yeah, just to say, I think it's what we can really do today is note that it's a work in progress, and so there's no point labouring the point here. It's quite clear that, you know, at the moment it seems that almost everything's on the table as a priority in some way, so there's a bit of work going on to refine those. But I'm glad James mentioned the report on the items in the one-year plan. I think it really would be useful for us for an exercise to monitor where we got to on each of those so that we can see. So the sooner that can be done, the better. Thanks.
Thanks, Douglas. Good points as well. Is there any more? If not, can we note those comments as well and then note the recommendations? We agree those? Agreed? Thank you. Next item is item 10, the medium-term financial report. Ryan, is that you?
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Keyworth. I'm the Council's Director of Finance and Commercial Services. So, the medium-term financial analysis, as mentioned at the last meeting of this committee, it's the first step in the Council's budget process, which will lead us up to full Council on the 1st of March next year. It sets the financial envelope that the Council has to live within, based on the planning assumptions that are set out in some considerable detail in the report. This is an early report, and it's in response to the difficult financial position that members will be very well aware the Council is in. And we will provide an update to this report at the October meeting as set out in the recommendations to that report. We'll also tell you earlier if new information emerges that materially alters the content of this report. The key recommendations in here are the request that policy committees, individual policy committees, are asked to develop savings proposals, additional income options and so on that cover their own pressures. So essentially that's each committee working to a cash standstill position. Each committee's got its own set of challenges, but that's the ask in this report, that's the recommendation. We're also asking that policy committees report back to their September meetings, and obviously all members here are on various policy committees, so you'll have heard me say that at all the policy committee meetings, to report back in September to how the policy committees are going to do that and to work with your officers throughout the course of the summer to achieve that objective. And a consolidated report, which, if this all goes to plan, will deliver a balanced budget that we can then move forward from, will be reported back to this committee on the 12th of October. I've included for context at the start of this report the month 2 monitoring position, just a brief update on that. No material changes to the month 1 position that we spent a little bit longer on at each policy committee, but also at this committee on the 31st of May. So I don't particularly intend to dwell on that section. Looking into medium-term financial analysis, we're obviously not alone as a local authority, a large metropolitan local authority, in facing a difficult financial position. But we did look like an outlier towards the end of 21-22. Our overspend was bigger than most of our comparable authorities, in fact all of them. There's a lot of detailed analysis in the report, but the underlying position is that we spend more on social care, both children's and adults, than you'd expect us to, given our relative deprivation as an authority. That leads, amongst other things, to a forecast gap of about £53 million for next year. The sensitivity analysis that we've included in the report states the obvious point that the Council's financial position is highly dependent, highly sensitive to the financial support we receive from government. So relatively small gesture in government financial terms can make an enormous difference to Sheffield City Council. But the lack of information, and at this stage in the planning cycle, you wouldn't expect a great deal from government, but we have nothing really to give us a clue. I've decided to plan on a fairly prudent basis. I'd much rather come to you much later in the process, as I've said before, with some opportunity to take difficult savings off the table, as opposed to an ask for more savings very late in the process. So this is a relatively prudent planning basis, in my view. We are reversing the use of reserves that balance the 22-23 budget, so the current financial year's budget. That is almost exactly offset, actually, by a 2% council tax increase assumption, a 1% adult social care precept increase assumption, and normal assumptions that we would make in any year on business rates uplift and adjustments to revenue support grant from government. That leaves the cash standstill position for the committees once that's taken into account. The only thing we're expecting in terms of additional funding is with adult health and social care, and we expect to get the council's normal 1% share of a nationally announced total to cover fair cost of care. So that's about £6 million in our case. The MTFA makes no assumptions in future years about the outcomes of any of the strategic reviews that are going on. For example, in the library service, in early help, early intervention and prevention, financial support, accommodation strategy, or anything like that. It makes no assumptions on that. Those things are for the policy committees to determine and not for me to presume in a medium-term financial analysis. Equally, I've made no assumptions about fees and charges that the council levies. So they are, in this analysis, cash standstill to this year. So there's no assumption there. So again, it's for policy committees to determine any increases that they wish to make to fees and charges, subject to the normal statutory limits that apply to some of those fees and charges. But that's down to individual committees. The assumption we've made on central government funding changes to the extent there are any, and the Secretary of State announced, I think it was last week, that the fair funding review, which has been ongoing for some years now, would come to a conclusion this calendar year. I'm making no assumptions about that. I'm assuming that any changes are net nil to the council. That's a risk. Frankly, it's the best I can do at this stage when all I have to go on are the words that the Secretary of State said. We've had no detail yet from government. Secretary of State also announced a 2-year financial settlement by the end of this year. Again, that will arrive probably just before Christmas, far too late to assist us in the planning process. It will at least give us some certainty for the following year, and we'll obviously pick that up as soon as we can. My hope is that bakes in a reasonable inflation assumption as opposed to a difficult one for us. There are lots of service-specific assumptions that are set out, as I said, in quite some detail in the appendices, and rather than, they're really for you as individual committee chairs to work with your policy committees on. I'll obviously try and answer any specific questions you've got today. The key decision point here is really on how we balance committee budgets, and this is something of a turning point for us, really. There's a chart in 2.19 that shows how we have prioritised investment in social care over many years now. You see the climb in the lines for adults and children's social care, and the other lines are either flat or on a downward trend, essentially. It's now difficult, if not impossible, for us to continue that trend without significant cuts or curtailment, stopping of existing services. And that brings me on to the approach I'm recommending to balance committee budgets. The recommendation in here is to require committees to report to their meetings in September on how they can balance their budgets, and to do that and to contain the pressures that they're facing. So to do that on a cash standstill basis. The reason for this is I want really to encourage committees to look very deeply within the services that they provide in this first round of the budget. Looking at fees and charges, looking at the scope and nature of services that are provided, the quality of services that's provided, the extent to which those services are mandatory, as in we have to do them, not necessarily in the way we currently do them, but nonetheless have to do them, and the extent to which some of the services that we still provide are optional. And there are some, and material will be issued to the relevant directors, and has been discussed with many of them already this week, which will help, hopefully, that discussion. That should mean that the Strategy and Resources Committee receives a balanced budget proposal on the 12th of October. It will then be for this committee to decide whether it wants to alter that. The committee will be able to assess whether it is satisfied with the way that policy committees have approached the task, or whether it wants to make any changes to that. The key for me is once we've achieved a balanced position, we move from a balanced position to another balanced position. And that is critically important in times like this. And also, obviously, as time goes on, we'll hopefully learn more about the government's position in terms of funding for local authorities, and we'll be able to update both the MTFA and our planning assumptions as we go forward. Chair, I think that's all I want to say on this report. Obviously happy to take questions that members have.
Thanks, Ryan. Is there questions? Marty? Marty?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ryan. Yes, it's a dire situation, and the report makes very sombre but very clear reading. I actually wanted to ask a question about income rather than the spend, and one of the things related to my committee that jumped out was the really big change in the forecast of business rates from the budget we set just a few months ago and your latest report. So it's gone from a prediction that the income will go up by 10 million to, I think it's going down by about 4.5 as I read it. That's a really big switch in such a short period of time. So I'm wondering if you could give us a wee bit more detail on that, and whether there's any particular sector. Have we got a breakdown in terms of the sectors in that? So thank you, Chair.
If I can, I'll get you a written answer specifically setting out that change in the business rates from the budget to now, because I don't want to speculate too heavily here. We are experiencing some challenges in recovery, though. I will say that, as businesses are starting to fully emerge from the pandemic, but in some cases start to struggle. But I'll get you some more on that. I think, though, the biggest single item in there is the business rate relief that we've received from government and how that plays out in our collection fund. But I'll get you a definitive answer on that, because I'm afraid with anything with business rates, it does get quite technical quite quickly, and I don't want to misspeak in this forum.
That's fair enough, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Ryan. Shafak?
Thank you, Chair. Ryan, I'm looking at, well, which page it is now, page 68 on the online, or page 24 of 33. And it's the very last paragraph, which is the assumption. These numbers assume that by the end of 22-23, all BIPs will have been delivered in full, and there will be no carryover pressures. Given where we are, my suggestion is that we need to keep a very close eye on these BIPs, particularly the ones that we've kind of signed up to, because already it's about 19 million now, Ryan, that we are forecasting overspending. So therefore, this assumption, for me, Chair, looks very challenging, that every BIP that was signed up in that budget that Martin just picked up. So could we have like a rag rated kind of for the BIPs to see where we are with them, which ones of the BIPs are causing us problems, and which ones are going to be delivered, and if we can over-deliver on some of them, even better. Thanks, Chair. I do have another question, but I won't mind this answer on this one first.
Thanks, Councillor Mohammed. Yeah, over-delivery on budget implementation plans, always welcome. The assumption you're talking about there is specifically in respect of adult health and social care, because that's where that comment's actually made. What we've done in the medium-term financial analysis, in the background and the detail of it, is we've made an assessment of this year's budget implementation plans and the ones that we think are going to deliver but deliver late, so be a timing issue, and those which we think might not deliver at all this year. The might not deliver at all this year is about £10 million, and we've built that £10 million rollover into the medium-term financial analysis. So the 53 million gap is actually 43 plus 10, if I can say it like that. So we have done. That comment at the bottom of page 68 looks a little bit inconsistent to me, and I'll take that away and check it, so thank you for spotting that.
I just thought I'd flag that. Chair, can I take you back up to the 1.2, basically the overspend, the most recent £500,000. A lot of it, I mean, what's the split? It's around the Home Office funding for unaccompanied asylum seeker children, not matching expenditure forecast. Can you just give us a bit more information about the breakdown of that, and more importantly, what we're doing about it? Are we making representations in the Home Office? Are we likely to get the actual cost of housing these very vulnerable young people that are, you know, in my view, coming to our city because we are the city of sanctuary. But you know, the Home Office needs to pay its way.
Thanks again, Councillor Mohammed. The issue here is that the amount of money that we get per child is not always enough. In fact, it's rarely enough. In some cases, the cost of looking after a child who comes to us on this scheme far exceeds the amount of money that the Home Office has given us. I don't have the specific numbers to hand, but it's, in some cases it can be several times. And again, Chair, if it's all right, I'll put a specific number so that, that's on the public record in the minutes for this meeting against that question.
Thanks. Shafak, Mick?
Yeah, I think, Brian, that sadly that's always been the case in that particular scheme. Couple of questions, may seem a little naive, but you did a couple of comparisons with core cities, and you said something along the lines of they do things, we do things that they don't do in terms of statutory obligations, because they've got the same ones as we have, and you sort of intimated that our costs are higher than theirs in terms of our response to statutory responsibilities. I wondered if you could answer that, and am I right? And the other one is, are they more fairly funded than we are? Because you also suggested that we were unfairly funded. So given that their problems, and I use the word very carefully, seem less urgent or less large as ours, are they treated better than we are?
I'll have a go at the second part of your question first. It's a really difficult one, Councillor Rooney. Well, indeed. The funding that we get over and above baseline council tax and so on is in many ways linked to deprivation. Sheffield, the city boundary of Sheffield encompasses some really deprived neighbourhoods and some really affluent neighbourhoods and some countryside and some, you know, semi-rural areas. And on average, that means that we're not as deprived as, say, the City Council area of Manchester, which covers the urban area from Manchester city centre through to the airport, with some significantly deprived areas, very little in the way of green space by comparison to Sheffield and so on. The City Council area of Liverpool is relatively similar to the City Council area of Manchester. Deprivation is correspondingly much higher in those areas than it is in the City of Sheffield. They get funded on that basis, so they get more money than us. Whether the difference in the funding that they get compared to us is fair or not, I'm not really in a position to say. It's just different. Some other city councils have certainly stopped providing some of the early intervention and prevention services that are, for example, within the scope of the review. Specific things, family centres, for example. We still do things that others don't do. That's a choice we've made. As a result of that, we've got a relatively low number of looked after children per head of population compared to others. How you factor that in against our relative deprivation is really difficult to do, to be perfectly honest. But nonetheless, we have a low absolute number. If you want to compare us to a city like Leeds, which is relatively similar to us in deprivation terms, we've got a low number of looked after children. So the investment that we make might result in a lower number of looked after children. The question we're going to have to answer is, can we afford that situation? And it's a horrible question to ask, but we're going to have to.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Wayne, for that question. Angela?
Thank you for the report, Brian. Mine is very specific questions about pay awards. I am assuming that the pay awards that have been calculated for 23-24 is for all staff.
Sorry, yes, it is.
Okay, so has any sort of thinking gone into, you know, considering the cost of living crisis? Is really, from my point of view, there are certain some of our, you know, our office and workers that are going to suffer a lot more than some others. So has there any, has there been any kind of thinking around capping or not giving an award to people, for example, that earn over £80,000? Because that would, you know, there's quite a lot of our officers, and those families are not going to be affected by the cost of living crisis as, you know, our social workers or our cleaners, or so could we maybe differentiate so that we can afford to pay people that really deserve to be able to you know, make a living and be able to feed their families, rather than have a you know, an umbrella pay rise for everybody when we've got, you know, a huge kind of differential between some people are paying on, you know, on very low wages, and some people are paying extortionary, no, I don't want to say that, but like, you know, well above average salaries. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Agencio. So, the pay assumption that we've put in the medium-term financial analysis is 4%, as you say, across the board for 23-24. I can almost guarantee you it won't pan out like that. Pay awards are nationally negotiated. Sheffield's still part of the national negotiation scheme. So you get different percentage pay rises tend to be applied to the lowest paid staff, tend to be higher. A general pay award applied to the next band of staff, and staff on chief officer contracts are paid slightly differently, again, on a different negotiation. The outcome of the national pay negotiations will inform the actual experience that Sheffield and our staff has. And again, it's a matter for the council to decide if we remain part of that national pay negotiation framework.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Ryan. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, are we going to see the I think what we'll call the red savings options from last year's budget that weren't considered acceptable, weren't taken? I know they've been asked for before. Are we going to see them? Are they going to go to the policy committees?
Yes, they'll be in the pack that I issue to directors tomorrow following this meeting.
All right, thank you. So my other question relates to waste and street scene in particular, and so I appreciate the approach here, and I'm supportive generally of the approach of asking committees to look after their pressures, but I'm not clear, because there is a recognition, page 57 and 1333, of the harder shift costs, that is to say, including the waste contract and the highways contract, which, in my understanding, make up the bulk of the cost pressure within the waste and street scene portfolio. So I'm not clear whether we're being asked to cover those pressures, and if so, I mean, I think what we need is clarity one way or the other. And if we are being asked to it, is the intention of Strategy and Resources that we, that we renegotiate those contracts and collect less waste and fix fewer roads, or that we look at everything else and do without whole services altogether? Because obviously we will look at whatever we're asked to look at, but I think because there's a recognition that those costs are hard to shift, and that's where a large part of our pressure comes from, I think a clearer view from here as to what we're being asked to do would be useful for us. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Otten. Yes, we will be asking you to look at those costs. There is a small amount of money that we keep corporately to help out with the highways contract inflation, but it's going to be nowhere near enough to deal with the inflation that we'll see currently. So we will be asking you to do that, I'm afraid. Again, it'll be really clear in the information that follows this meeting when we talk to individual directors and policy committees about the specific targets and the actions that are required.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Ryan. Douglas, then Mick.
Thanks. just got a couple of small factual questions, really. Just on page 66, there's a mention of energy costs there. So, for instance, energy costs going up by nearly 900,000, but 2/3 of those just relate to Howden House. So, just a question of why is that? Is that right? There's a particular reason there, isn't there? Go on, right.
Councillor Otten also spotted that particular error in the report, for which I apologise.
Okay.
That £579,000 is not just energy for Howden House. I think that's the full inflation amount. So something's got truncated in there. So apologies for that, and thank you for spotting it.
Okay, that's fine. Glad to know it's an error. Because it's just those small items we can pick off one by one. That's fine. The other one was on page 73. There's the reference to the our tenants who have district heating and whether they will get the £400 energy rebate that's been promised by the government. It says there's a risk there that the £400 energy discount won't apply to district heating customers. That's a lot of our tenants, a lot of people who are going to be most in need of things to do with the cost of living and a significant amount of money that will otherwise go into the local economy. Do you know how big the risk is? Is there any update on that? What's being done to find out about that risk, and what is there that we can do to clarify that with government?
Can't clarify it beyond that, but I'll get an answer from the people who know and pop it in the minutes again if I can do that, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, if we can take that up through Housing Committee, because that does want clarifying sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas. Thanks, Ryan. And finally, Mick. Oh, Richard, sorry.
Thank you,
Mick.
Chair. I just want to go sort of reference the yes, I'm here. Hello, it's me again. Reference the answer that you gave to one of my last questions, and you spoke in terms of what we do and don't do in terms of children's services. What is it? Is there an equivalent set of what we do that other people don't do in adult services? Because there's a huge overspend. I think Councillor Argentia has just fainted when I mentioned that, because she has the pleasure of chairing that committee. But is there an equivalent set of things that we do that other people don't in terms of adult services? And the other is, I'm trying to, I think you said October that the alleged balanced budgets will come to this committee. I'm trying to understand how that will be structured, because I don't mean this disrespectful, and it's not a flippant remark. Some committees will have an easier task, and I use that word relatively, than others balancing their budgets. And I'm trying to understand how we will discuss the relative merits or relative pain of proposals put by, say, Douglas's committee, and mine and Angela's, in this forum. Because, we're going to be talking about maybe not doing that, or cutting services, preventative services to children, as you mentioned. So I'm just trying to get my head around how that's going to be structured. Thank you.
To answer your first question first, I can't think of any specific examples at the moment on the adult side. Basically, because the biggest challenge we've got on the adult budget is things like case reviews, which I know Councillor Argencio is well familiar with. But when we publish the budget detail tomorrow, there is a detailed analysis of the adult health and social care spend, what's mandatory, what's optional. What I don't have is a comparison of how that compares to other cities, so I'm not in a position to really comment. How are we going to do this at the October the 12th meeting? This committee, all of us, are going to have to do a lot of work over the course of the summer, and particularly in September, as the detail for each policy committee starts to emerge. Completely acknowledge that presenting this committee with what will be a very thick, complicated report is not going to do the job, and having the debate here like this isn't necessarily going to work. We're going to have to find a way of doing it and distilling it in a way that makes some of the choices clearer, and we're going to have to do a lot of work outside the formal meeting, I think, to bring those choices to bear in exactly the same way. I mean, you said, I think, at the last meeting of this committee, you know, the comparison between how much and how often we collect waste with services that we provide to vulnerable children. That's exactly the debate I'm afraid we're going to have to find a way of having. And we need to do that in the build-up to that 12th of October meeting. It's also one of the reasons, frankly, why I want to try and get to a position on the 12th of October, which is about 8 weeks before we really need it finalising. I'm conscious that those discussions leading up to and around the 12th of October will cause asks from this committee for changes, to put money back into this service, take money out of that service. We've then got about an 8-week period to work that through leading up to the 5th of December, which is when we really do need to finalise this. It's not going to be easy, I won't pretend, no.
Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Rainer. I look forward to the chairs debating that, to be quite honest, of each committee. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. The final question, comment is Richard.
Thank you, Chair. My experience is that when you cut services early on, it has a longer term likelihood of increasing costs. A child who isn't supported when they're young quite often needs a lot more support when they're an adult. Within the review, which is going to take place this summer, is there any mechanism to predict what a cut to child services would add to the budget down the track? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. There's an enormous amount of work going on actually in looking at exactly those sort of things. Nobody wants to cut preventative services here that just push a problem down the road. That's in nobody's interest, let alone the child. It's not even in the budget's long-term interests, as you say. You know, preventing a child from going into care is almost certainly going to be cheaper than looking after a child when they get there. What we've got to try and do is to strike the right balance here of this. Early intervention and prevention services work really well, and the evidence is quite compelling when they're very, very targeted and address specifically, you know, sort of detailed, identified risks. They work much less well and are much more difficult to demonstrate causality when they're widely cast and general. And that's the thing that we need to try and strike here. Of course, you know, general intervention and prevention work probably does help, but decades later, and probably not the council. We need to try and focus the investment we've got in providing specific support, and that's the challenge that review's got, and it's really not an easy job, and I certainly don't envy the officers and members will be working on that, the task they've got there, but it's one we really do need to try and get to. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Ryan, and that's why intervention prevention criteria is crucial to all of this. Colleagues, we've got a number of recommendations to note this report. Can we note this report? Obviously, with points taken that you've raised. Okay, anybody against? Thank you. Thanks. The next item is item 11. Ryan, take that. This is yourself again. Item 11, month 2 budget monitoring.
Actually, Chair, the key item on here is the outturn report. I've already spoken about the month 2 monitoring, so I'm not going to repeat myself. This is the outturn element of this report is the formal final financial position for 21-22. It's a necessary report in the lead up to the production of our financial statements, which are currently ongoing and hopefully sign off from an officer point of view later this month. This is a position that I've already reported to members in high level. This is the more detailed review of it and one or two added extras in terms of the capital programme and the Treasury report. Members will be familiar with the £19.8 million general fund overspend. You'll be familiar with the reasons around social care expenditure pressures. As the report sets out, the position would have been £10.4 million worse but for the one-off income we got from the NHS linked to adult health and social care. The major cause of the overspend does relate to increase in costs and continuation of high costs really in social care from the height of the pandemic, and the analysis really draws that out. And many of those high costs resulting from the pandemic are the subject of the budget implementation plans that we talk about in various policy committees in the budget monitoring. The tables in the report analyse in a little bit of detail the variance between budget implementation plan delivery and kind of underlying cost increases or other relevant categories of analysis as it matters. The overspend of £20 million is funded from reserves as we're required to fund, and that uses 20 million of the £70 million of reserves that the council set aside to deal with our financial challenges. So that's the general fund. The dedicated schools grant overspent by about £3 million, just under £3 million, really relating to special educational needs transport and places. That's funded from dedicated schools grant reserve, so it doesn't affect the general fund position, but it's obviously not a position that we can continue in the long term. The public health funding of about £34 million, underspent by about £1 million, that's taken to reserves specific to public health. It's ring-fenced, it's not available for other use. The housing revenue account actually balances, but it balances by adjusting the reinvestment in long-term repairs and maintenance. So we put £4.6 million less than we wanted to, than we budgeted to, into those long-term repairs and maintenance. The major reason, two really. First of all, higher than expected vacant properties, largely because they were awaiting repair, and higher expected costs associated with doing housing repairs. In large part, that was recovering from the backlog that had built up over the pandemic period. So to a certain extent, as it says in the report, that's a timing issue. There are two formal carry-forward requests in this report, one relating to local area committees. The council approved in last year £100,000 per local area committee, so £700,000 total. That wasn't spent last year because of the timing of setting up of local area committees, so the ask here is to roll that money forward to this year. And clinically extremely, knew I wouldn't be able to say this, support for clinically extremely vulnerable people. This is a carry-forward proposal which has been reported to the relevant policy committee of £974,000 to continue that support for this financial year to help some of those people who were most adversely affected during the height of the pandemic. So both these carry-forwards are included in the medium-term financial analysis. They were included in the budget monitoring updates that went to the individual policy committees, and approval doesn't adversely impact the council's financial position other than has already been reported. On the capital side, this is the capital outturn report. Chair, do you want me to stop after the revenue position and take questions, then move to capital, or do you want me to carry on?
Yeah, Ryan. What page is this? Page 9 or page 7 of 11, whatever it is. 1.4.2. Councillor Joe Horton earlier did mention some key underperforming areas, and housing repair was one of them. And clearly here it's 2.1 million overspent from shortfalls in approved budget savings proposals in the year, notably housing repair restructure. Can I just ask, Janet might want to answer this as well, where are we with the restructure? Because clearly at the moment the repair service isn't working, it's over budget and underperforming, and clearly needs restructuring, and it's claiming that part of the budget problem here is the restructure's not quite worked. So it would be good to know where are we with that.
Perhaps I can start and perhaps Janet can carry on. There was a long-standing budget implementation plan in housing repairs and maintenance to restructure that service. It goes back a year or two before this one, and to essentially reduce or increase the general fund value of that service. That was delayed several times, including by the pandemic. And I think this is where I might ask Janet to comment if you're able. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So in terms of the formal restructure, that should be in place by the end of July, and then there is a programme of implementation. Obviously, that will involve, changing some of the roles of individuals, and then there'll be that period of transition, and also making sure that we are clear on the priorities for the repair service and how those works are delivered. Yes, there are some significant pressures in terms of the repairs budget, and that a detailed piece of work is taking place, and that will be going to the Housing Policy Committee in September.
Thank you, Chair. I do hope that we approve the local area committee carry forward, because we started spending ours. So I hope the answer to that one is yes, so we owe you some money, Ryan. The first question is about the reorganisation of the CCG. Do you think, and I think you might answer, I don't know to this, but do you think that that might have an effect on our budgetary position, given that we're now talking about a budget that's got to go across South Yorkshire and beyond, and if it might have an effect on our joint commissioning budgets and such like? And the other is a question again, I'm not sure you'd be able to answer this, but at what point in the budgetary process do you say, right, that's the figure I'm going to use for setting next year's budget? Because you give us an update every month, and there must come a month when you say, right, that's the figure I think that it's going to be end up as. And I'm just wondering when you do that. If you can answer that, I don't know.
Do you mean for the CCG?
I'm sorry, I've done a bit of a butterfly mind there, haven't I? I mean, in terms of our budget, at what month in this year's process would you say, right, I think that's the figure it's going to be at the end of it all?
So on the CCG, or the Integrated Care Board, you're right, I don't know yet how it's going to pan out. I don't think there's going to be major changes initially. We're still talking to the same people, same finance people anyway, on the other side, if you like, that we were talking to 3 or 4 days ago. That won't change. But we'll just have to see how it works out. In terms of the budget, I mean, the ultimate kind of strike date for me is about 31st December. That's when I have to decide, right, for next year, that's what it's going to be. Because that's when we frankly have to stop, make sure it all adds up, write it up, make sure all the relevant approvals are gained and all the rest of it. That's why we've got an early medium-term financial analysis now. We'll have another one in October, which will be different. I'm hoping not too different. Well, I hope it'll be better, but it'll be different. And we'll probably have another version just before Christmas, to be quite honest. The final true-up, though, is the government financial settlement. That's when the music stops, if you want a date.
Thanks. Any more questions? If not, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. In my 1.34, it talks about variances. Second from the bottom is one about £2 million underspend on youth budgets. As I understand it, that's happened for a number of years. At what point does that, I mean, it's an underspend, but it means we're under-delivering. How do you treat that going forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. So additional funding was made available to the youth service, as you said, a couple of years ago, with the expectation that the youth service will ramp up activity and deliver more activity. That's taken longer to get up and running than we wanted it to. I think that's fairly safe to say. That ramping up is now well in progress. I'm not expecting that level of underspend to continue.
Thank you. If there's no, Paul?
The investment in housing resources had been ignored for years by councillors of all parties, especially the IT systems which were antiquated. The Democrat members are keen to constantly criticise the repair service and yet never recognise we do 2,000 jobs a week with high satisfaction levels in normal run jobs.
I think we'll take that as a comment, right? Yeah.
Councillor Wood, am I right in taking that as a comment? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, with that, thank you, Paul, for that comment. With that, there are a number of recommendations in the report. Can we agree?
Councillor Fox, before we proceed, can I just check there are no questions that members have on either the capital appendix, which is for information largely, because Damien's going to present a more up-to-date position in a couple of minutes, or the Treasury appendix, which I will endeavour to answer questions if members do have them. But that's a formal report that I have to make, that's all. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, with those, is there any more questions to the reports? If not, can we agree the report and the recommendations? Agreed? Thank you, thank you, thank you, right. We're on to item 12. James, is that you?
Thanks, Chair. So this item is to update the committee on the progress made following the decision made at the meeting of the 31st of May about responding to the cost of living crisis for the city. The committee agreed at that meeting that a further report should be brought forward to this meeting, setting out a proposed strategy and action plan for addressing the cost of living crisis in Sheffield. And that's what this paper is doing. Subsequent to the previous meeting of the committee, a cost of living crisis strategy group was established, and the first meeting of that was held on the 23rd of June, chaired by Councillor Grocott. And that group brings together a cross-party group of elected members, including a representative from each of the policy committees, along with a number of partners from across the public, private and voluntary and community sectors. And that group had an initial discussion about the approach to and shape of a proposed strategy and action plan, which is set out in the paper that you've got today. We have also, following the last meeting, undertaken a range of engagement across the city, including with the Health and Wellbeing Board, the group bringing together the chairs of the local area committees and the voluntary sector. And I'm aware that one of my colleagues has attended the South East Local Area Committee as well to brief them on the work that is being undertaken and to get their views into how we respond to the cost of living crisis. I won't go into the background to the cost of living crisis. I think that's probably well understood and we discussed at the last meeting. But the proposed strategy itself has got an overall aim of seeking to work with, and I think that's important, so it's working with, not seeking to do to, the people and communities of Sheffield to help mitigate and support them through the significant challenges that they will be facing over the coming months, with a particular focus on those who are struggling the most and who may struggle the most, particularly as we move into the winter period. The paper also sets out a number of specific objectives that we're suggesting that the action plan should be focused around. So around, for example, income maximisation, about ensuring that people who are facing financial crisis have emergency support in place. I know Janet is going to be talking about the Housing Support Fund shortly, and making sure that we're coordinating across all partners the support for people and communities that need it most. The strategy and action plan also set out a number of specific work streams that we have structured the action plan around, and some key principles that we think need to inform the work to respond to the cost of living crisis. So that's around making sure that we have identified all of the levers that we have available to us in the city, recognising that there are many wider forces beyond our control, so we need to focus on what we can influence, making sure that we're focusing our work on those things that are going to have the biggest impact, either on a large number of people or where we can have particularly focused impact on those who are struggling the most and who are more vulnerable, about a continuing focus on prevention wherever possible, but recognising that this is very real and very current for very many families in the city. Prioritising actions that enable people to draw on their own strengths, recognising that there are considerable strengths across the communities of Sheffield, and making sure that the actions that we're taking are informed by data and intelligence and the evidence that we have from the people and communities of Sheffield. So the action plan is as set out in the paper. I also just wanted to draw members' attention briefly to the food access plan, which is included as an appendix to this paper. The food access plan follows on from a full council resolution on the right to food that was passed in September 2021 and has been established following the full council agreeing to invest £200,000 in supporting food access in the city as part of its 2022-23 budget. And the proposed approach to the food access plan focuses that on three key areas which are aligned to the wider approach to responding to the cost of living crisis, and those are around responding to immediate needs, so in particular supporting food banks to respond to immediate need for individuals and families in terms of access to food, seeking to respond to some of the underlying causes of food poverty, and then thirdly, ensuring that there is coordination and capacity building for the food bank network, which is obviously something that is undertaken in very much a voluntary capacity across the city. So supporting the further development of food banks and food relief projects, which I'm sure members would wish we didn't have to have in this city, but nevertheless are an important component of the infrastructure that we now have in place to be able to support people who are in crisis. So the food access plan sets out how that, a proposal for how that £200,000 should be dispersed across those three strands. I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment, but very happy to take any questions that members may have on any of that. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from what James has said, it's a series of comments more than questions, if I may, please. I think it's a really sad reflection on our society that we find ourselves in this situation today, but sadly we are in a cost of living crisis. I think as a city council, you know, we are doing absolutely everything we can to assist our citizens and make sure that we can look after them as best we can. We started some work last year with the Poverty Summit that we ran. I don't think any of us had any idea when the Poverty Summit was run where we would find ourselves now, which is extremely worrying. I'd like to thank officers for putting all the hard work in, that they've, you know, come together quickly, done a tremendous amount of work to get us to a place where we are today with the action plan. Our partners, you know, both in statutory and particularly voluntary services, have all come together pretty much like we did at the start of the pandemic to make sure that we can work through, that we can have a consistent, carefully considered approach to dealing with it and making sure that those people who are most in need get the need and support that they get. So from me, I would just like to say thank you for everyone who's been involved so far. This is going to be a difficult and quite a long piece of work, but I know that we are all determined to make sure that we do the best for everyone across the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Julie, and echo those comments. Any questions, comments, if we can agree that? Oh, sorry, Angela.
Just very quickly, thank you for the report, and yes, thank you very much to the officers who've worked on this. I think from a practical point of view, it's very important to ensure that what we're going to have is a situation where people who have not used food banks or haven't needed help before will need to, which is, you know, heartbreaking. So we need to ensure that where our communication has not been up to, you know, the standards that the public up there expects, that we are really, really clear about where to go, what to do, kind of thing. Because, but also on a different note, more general, I think maybe we should have something in our corporate plan about not having food banks in Sheffield within 10 years. So that could be like an aim, like where nobody needs a food bank in Sheffield.
Thank you, Councillor Ardencio. I think the point that you make is absolutely right, that there will be potentially very many people who haven't needed support in the past and who will need it now, and we need to make sure that we are able to signpost them to the support that is available. The other thing that I will perhaps draw members' attention to is the equality impact assessment that accompanies this report, and I think describes that there will be specific impacts, or that the impacts will be more significant for some groups of people in the city, and that there are particular impacts in terms of health, age, disability, pregnancy and race as well. So we need to be very mindful of the fact that this crisis is likely to be felt differently by different people in the city, and that needs to be a strand that runs through the work that we do here. I think the other thing that I might just say at this point is that obviously this is a very fast-moving issue, and we need to keep the plan that we have under review, and members will see that it isn't a finalised plan by any stretch of the imagination. So we will keep iterating that, improving it, and working with the strategic group to ensure that that is as robust and as focused as it possibly can be. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Angela. Douglas?
Just going to make a brief comment on, in terms of the cost of living and the food access plan, which is really good. It's £200,000 there. Useful money, not in the big scheme of things. We also promote the need for advice work there, because it's all about prevention, and echoing Angela's comments about wanting to get rid of food banks. We need to do what we can to stop people falling into crisis. But I just want to reflect on bringing money into the council budgets as a result of this, so as to try and deal with some of the issues that Ryan's been addressing us on, and just the need to do that, and we really could do with making sure that some of these elements here are used to lever in as much money from national government and national agencies as possible, and bring them into Sheffield pockets. So whether it's benefits advice, getting those national benefits in, or even from organisations like the British Gas Trust Fund that helps out with charitable donations, because it's really about keeping people out of crisis, because the small amount of money that is needed to avoid a crisis is a massive saving to us in terms of social services.
Thanks, Douglas, and I think point's well made. Okay, on that report, can we agree the report? Thank you. The next item is item 15, which is the Housing Support Fund. Janet, do you want to kind of introduce this and yourself? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to bring this report here today for approval. Also here this afternoon is Carly Speechley, and jointly we have overseen this piece of work, and also the review of all our hardship funds within the council. So this is the second report on the Housing Support Fund. The previous one was last autumn, when the government allocated Sheffield City Council just over 5 million in terms of emergency funding, so that we could support some of our most vulnerable families, our children, and also individuals that were suffering from significant hardship. So we were allocated that funding for up to the end of the financial year, and we have recently, it was announced that we would receive a further £5.2 million, which is great news for the city, great news for children, for families, and also this time as well for households with someone of pensionable age as well to benefit. So the report provides information and gives a background of the Housing Support Fund. It is a fund to help support people, you know, with food, with clothing, with living costs, to help people to be able to afford to live their lives and to support families. And there is some specific guidance. Last year, the guidance was that at least 50% would be with children and families. And this year, the recommendation is that a third would go to households with someone of a pensionable age. So that's a new inclusion in the guidance to be supported. And a third with families and children, with also then an amount of money for families and individuals facing hardship. I think that helps us to be able to plan how we spend that money with those cohorts. And one of the things that we are doing is utilising the same arrangements that we have done in the past. So in terms of the reactive spend, as detailed in the report, that will help support individuals facing significant hardship and also families who come to the council, and the council will use its existing arrangements to be able to support those individuals. We have also been doing quite a comprehensive mapping exercise, so we understand in the city who is coming to us to find help and support, whether that is through existing pathways, through social care, through schools and through obviously children's services as well as housing, so that we can identify those individuals. And the report is recommending that we follow the government's guidance on how this money is spent, and we will be introducing the pensioner element, and that is that we will utilise a third of the funding for those households with someone of pensionable age, and that means that we would be awarding about £100 per household, and we will utilise the existing information that we have as the council, particularly in terms of that we've utilised through council tax support schemes, and also the information that we hold. And so we will obviously be identifying those people, and similarly to the energy rebate, we'll be obviously providing that money directly to bank accounts. And for those without bank accounts or without direct debit arrangements that they hold with the council, we will obviously be using, again, the post office route to be able for people to access that additional money. And so we will then review those arrangements, you know, after the 6-month period, which is what this fund lasts for. It's from April to the end of September. We have been given an indication that it will carry on to the end of the financial year, and so we are putting in place, obviously, plans both from a 6-month and a 12-month period. And then families with children, I'm sure that Carly will be able to add a little bit more on this, very much following the same arrangements as we put in place last financial year. In terms of providing essential support for families with children, and particularly in the form of providing school vouchers, and to make sure that our children in school are able to have essential food that they need. And also included in the report is a forecast that should this fund continue and we get a similar reward as indicated later on this year, that we will make sure all children's holidays are covered with support and utilise our existing arrangements to identify those children. And I think you will see in the report that, you know, quite a significant number of children have already benefited from the Housing Support Fund, which is great news for the city. And then really picking up on in terms of future strategic planning. So we have been doing some mapping exercise in terms of all of the council's hardship funds and who we are supporting through those funds, to see if there is a more efficient way to support individual households, looking at our existing pathways and we will aim to bring a report back to this committee later on this financial year to see how we're using this money, but more importantly, you know, making sure that we clearly understand who needs our support in the city and to make sure that those arrangements are easy for them to access support when they need it. So hopefully the report is fairly straightforward, and I think Carly and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet, and thanks to you and Collie and the teams, certainly over the free school meals vouchers, the way we've been able to help those families in need has been a much needed thing. I've got a couple of questions, Joe, and then Shafak.
Thanks, Chair. So, yes, thank you. Obviously, thank you for the report and for the work that's gone into it. The one thing I'm slightly concerned about is whether the 1/3 to be spent on pensioners reflects an actual need among pensioners that we've identified. Because, I mean, it strikes me that compared to 20 years ago, the balance of hardship has shifted largely from, well, not largely, but to a great extent from pensioners to young people of working age. And, I mean, it's called Housing Support Fund, this, isn't it, as opposed to general hardship support. It strikes me that for young people, possibly in zero-hour contracts with a minimum wage, unreliable incomes, and unreliable housing, that they may, lose their home at short notice and have to find somewhere else to rent, and that comes up with another load of costs in terms of, costs of moving and costs of moving into a new place. And there's bound to be lots of instances of quite severe hardship for young people of working age whenever that happens, and that doesn't seem to be recognised in what we're calling a housing support fund. So, I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't pensioners who need this support, but I'm slightly puzzled that we've given put an age bracket in to a particular age bracket rather than saying, well, look, where is the need, and can we just address the need wherever it falls on the age spectrum, and please let's not miss out the young people who are in need.
Yes, thank you. And this was a new introduction this time in the guidance. I think that was based on the number of pensioners that are in receipt of council tax support and other benefit support, and also probably recognising as well that the additional cost of living are affecting some of our most vulnerable older people. So we are recommending that we follow the government's guidance, that's been set out. We do recognise, obviously, that, we may well have some pensioners who don't need the additional sums of money, and obviously, if anyone wished to contribute the money back, then obviously that will be welcomed. But we do have in the city quite a significant number of households with single and older people living in those households, with sizable under-occupancy, and that probably the cost of maintaining their homes will be significant, and that's certainly coming out from the information as we're pulling together, obviously, some of the housing need information for the future housing strategy, in terms of, and certainly once we're doing a lot of work with our health colleagues and also in social care, and we're also seeing high levels of vulnerability and also high levels of access into hospitals with trips and falls in particular as well. So I do think that there is a need to support households with pensionable age. Obviously, that's probably the view of the government. And also we will be working obviously with those households to see if there is any other support, or to make sure that they're accessing all the benefits and other income that they can to help support them, particularly over the next 12 months.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Janet. Shafak and Mick.
I'm going to follow up on Joe's comment about, often young people, particularly those leaving care, may well need a bit of extra help with housing costs in particular, starting off with, as Joe says, often minimum wage or zero-hour contracts. I mean, clearly this is a government funding, government dictate to us how it's spent. Previously it was in two categories, households and with families. Now it's free. We've got to jump through that hoop. The only issue, and I think you touched on it, is that you said you'd go through the kind of housing services and social care. I mean, one group of kind of residents that often misses out is either in private rented or owner occupied, and clearly we do have plenty of examples in all our wards where often 30 years ago the house was suitable for the family at the time, and now, as you say, it's a lot smaller. It might be a single occupant, and they might be asset rich, but, you know, cash poor. And I think if we can do some specific work about looking at those more privately owned properties that clearly will show signs of disrepair, like gardens not being kept, or, you know, double glazed windows not being there. I mean, I've seen a few recently out and about that, you know, I think maybe we as all councillors could start to just point you in the right direction to say, what about these particular set of properties? Do they qualify for support? Because clearly, you know, people, pensions in particular, will be quite vulnerable with the cost of living crisis, just as Joe's rightly pointed out, the young people, particularly those living care.
Could just clarify, so we're not expecting, obviously, families to come direct to housing and then come directly to children's and also care services. We will be using the council's pathway that's worked really well for us, and particularly during the pandemic, so that we've got a single point of access for individuals as well as, and that's individual of all ages, as well as families, to be able to access as well the reactive element of this funding, you know, those people who need urgent support, and also, you know, recognising that children, you know, do need some specific support, and their families, and I think that's the benefit of having both a third of the funding for children, as well as them families being able to access the additional reactive element if they need to as well. Do you want to say?
Thanks, Sheffield. Janet. Mick, then Julie.
Jenna, if you could just clarify something I thought I heard you say, was that we might be in a position where some pensioners would be returning the money because they didn't need it. Surely the system that we've got set up and the channels that we're using would prevent that from happening. Well, because that seems a bit odd that we give people money when the statistics we're using say that they don't need it.
I think what we're saying is that when we have provided allocations, you know, some people, individuals, very small in numbers, have contacted us and said, we don't need that funding. Very small numbers, but that is an individual choice. How this money is being allocated, particularly with pension age, is people who we've identified through council tax support and benefit support. So there's about 17,000 individuals that are very need, but we can't never remove ourselves from people's individual personal choices.
I mean, I accept that people will say, for whatever reason, I don't need this or I don't want it or whatever. It's just that I thought I was hearing you say that we would be sending money out to people who,
No, it's very much targeting the most vulnerable. Okay. But, you know, in previous schemes, on occasions, people have said, you know, I can manage without this, and that is a personal choice, and we would respond to those on an individual basis.
Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Janet. Just clarity for me, probably hard of hearing. Cool. Did you say 70,000 vulnerable poops? Thank you. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. It's just something so I can get my head around this. We've got tried and tested ways of targeting people who we know are vulnerable, but we all know, because of the cost of living crisis, that group of people is changing every day. So it's just about people who this week may not fit into the system, but may next week. Have we got means of capturing those so that they can access this funding as well? And I'm thinking perhaps, you know, staff who we've got in adult social care, social workers, those sort of people, are they aware of this and other funding so that they can give people who are new to making claims access and support and the right advice, so that we are reaching as many people as we can, not those that we just know about, but those that we need to know about in the future as well. Thank you.
So the free school meals list and the the council tax benefits list are regularly refreshed, so that if you are not qualifying for free school meals in the summer holidays, but you are in October, you'll still be picked up in that October period. We've also got trusted assessors for the reactive element in each of the frontline services, so that where we come across individuals that haven't been proactively targeted through free school meals or because they're on council tax benefit, that they can be their trusted assessors for those people to access the reactive element.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Thanks, Carly. If there's no more questions, comments, can we agree this report? Obviously, it's government guidelines, etc., as has been highlighted. Okay, anybody against? Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Carly. Going back to the agenda then, back to number 13, capital approvals. Damien?
Hi, yeah, I'm Damien Watkinson. I'm Finance Manager for Capital, bringing forward capital approvals for this month. Recommendations are to approve the additions and variations that are in Appendix 1 and confirm the terms and conditions of the grants that we're going to issue to third parties in Appendix 2. So it's divided up by policy committee area in Appendix 1. I'm not going to run through the detail of every single one, but I'll just draw out the key themes and highlights. We've already had a question on actually the first item, which is the demolition of Barker's, the JLP car park. And as Councillor Fox rightly said, this is putting the budget in place to allow us to move on that when that decision's made. So that's looking at it being 1.3 million that will be funded as part of the whole of the Heart of the City project. But yeah, it will be considered in the round as part of the whole of that development. We've then got several 20-mile-an-hour projects, which are, one is specifically around school streets and putting in variable timing speed limits for 20 mile an hour around specific schools, and then the wider zones at Handsworth, Crosspool and Manor Park, moving on to the delivery stages of those. There's also on here the next building on the next phase of the Transforming Cities Fund around the southwest bus corridors. So that's trying to improve public transport connectivity around that. Now, this is taking these to the next stage of design, but it's taking the suite of options to that next stage of design, which is something that we need to do to submit the next business case to the combined authority. And the service staff has said, just for clarity, there's no decision being made now on whether there'll be changes to bus lane hours or red routes or any of those elements. That'll be a separate report that will be considered by the Transport, Regen and Climate Change Committee. So this is just increasing the budget to allow us to develop the detailed design of the options rather than actually implementing any of those at this point. Under Communities, Parks and Leisure, we've got a couple of items. There's the inclusion of a Cardwell Drive in the Play Improvements project, which has been it's on its 7th phase of upgrading areas around the city, and Cardwell Drive is the latest one to be added into. I think it's phase 7. We've got a proposal to improve security at Sky Edge, so that's largely around pathways, but also preventing access to vehicles and preventing fly tipping. So it's about improving security around that site. And then also we've got the final phase of the works at the Forge Dam, where the pond's been desilted, but they've had several problems on site. There's had to be repair works done to the dam as well. So it's adding in the final part of the budget in order to finalise the works there that are now almost complete. In housing, the majority of the spend is around the stock increase programme. So we've currently got 4.7 million coming forward for the acquisition of 28 apartments at Handsworth. We've also got £1 million more or less on providing move-on accommodation for rough sleepers as part of our statutory duty. So that's £1 million there at Fraser Road. And we've got some increased costs at our older person independent living area at Adlington, which is also now almost complete, but there's been additional costs relating to the heat metering that's going in there, which has caused a bit of a delay. We've also had reprofiling of several schemes, particularly at Hemsworth, Gaunt Road and Bowl Hill View. So it's been as a result of extended tendering processes on some of them. We've had some planning issues and ecology surveys that need to be done, ground conditions. So there's approximately, I'd say, about £30 million worth of work that's going to move out of this year into next year as regarding the stock increase programme. Then on the education, children and families, we've got a couple of special educational needs integrated resources at Greenhill Primary and Acres Hill Primary that are going to be delivered by the Academy Trusts. So it's going to give us some places there as part of our SEND strategy, which tries to also deliver, as well as special educational needs schools, specific places, that integrated resource within existing primary schools within mainstream, which is found to be very effective. So part of what's in Appendix 2 is just a brief summary of the terms and conditions that will be passporting that funding onto the academies who are going to deliver those schemes for us. There's also a couple actually cost increases. Again, I think I've mentioned this before, that the cost inflation in the construction sector feeding through now. The schemes at King Egberts and Silverdale are showing increased costs. That's still affordable currently within the funding we've now received from government, but that's bringing those forward. And we're also adding in 150k from our school condition allowance for emergencies. We always try and hold this 150k contingency for those unexpected items that come up, particularly in primary schools where we need to move quickly and maybe not have time to come back for a specific budget for a specific scheme. So that's just our contingency that's going in there. And lastly, there's a scheme at Pitworth where Pitworth School where there was significant movement, ground movement and cracks appearing. We're doing that rectification work now, but again, it's one where additional drainage issues have been found and the costs have increased there. So again, that's coming from the school condition allowance. Sorry, I spoke really quickly, just tried to summarise. There's a lot in there, but if you have any questions.
Thanks, as I always say, people think that we've got no money and nothing's going on in this city, but it's always enlightening, is this report about what is actually going on around the city. I've got Joe and then Martin. Joe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I'm content to approve all the recommendations, with one exception, one clarification, I suppose, and that is, it is some months since a petition came to this council regarding the proposals regarding bus lanes in the South West Bus Corridor, and I think it is high time the businesses on those roads and the petitioners had some reassurance that we weren't indeed planning still to do all-day bus lanes on those routes. So I would like to propose an amendment to the recommendations to say that the approval for South West Bus Corridors scheme does not extend to approving funding for all-day bus lanes. And I would like to propose that as an amendment, if I have a second.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Well, that was well orchestrated. What I would say is my understanding, or just for clarity for me from the chair, is that this money on this process is about doing the options case of listening to businesses and everything coming through. So this amendment will not stop that work ongoing. All the amendment will do is put to this report. It's not about actually going out with tins of paint, painting the red lines. I'm just being clarity for that. So, because my understanding was this allowance was about putting in the options of the feedback, certainly what me and Councillor Douglas Johnson had heard last year with obviously Councillor Sheffield. So this is just about doing the options based for that. So I understand, I'm just making clear, this don't stop that money. I've got that amendment. I've got Julian and then Douglas. I can't see you. Anyway, Julian and Douglas. Oh, but Shafak was, sorry, Martin, was it on this point? So, all right, can I just finish this and then I'll come back to you. Julian and Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when I read this last week, I was horrified when I saw that in the report because clearly it's been very controversial. So I did ask to have a meeting with officers just to get some clarification around where we were, and they were very helpful. They said that this is about securing the funding from the MCA to draw down to develop the full business case. They will need to do further consultations. This will allow them, the funding will allow them to do a detailed plan, whatever you call it, on the feedback that they've already had from residents and businesses, because while we've got that at the moment, no work has been undertaken to put that into any sort of proper plan that they can produce to the committee, so that we can look at that and make a proper decision on this. So this was all about, I was told in no uncertain terms that this was not about committing to any implementation whatsoever. Those were the very words used. I wrote them down just to make sure that I was absolutely clear on that. So I was content with it as it was, in terms of I could look people in the face and say this does not mean that we are going to be painting red lines and putting bus routes in, but we do need to make sure that we secure the funding from the MCA for all of the work that needs to be done. So I don't know if that helps.
Thanks, Julie. Douglas Denmeek. Douglas.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I agree with what Julie's just said, and also the Chair's explanation. I think just it's important to note that, well, first of all, I wouldn't support something that's proposed that would have the effect of closing down consultation in the way that's suggested. But also, just to reinforce what Julie was saying, the proposal just refers to red routes, which is not the same as 12-hour bus lanes. And the point about red routes is it's only a means of enforcement of what's already dangerous and criminal behaviour, which were infringements of double yellow lines. So it's about the means of enforcement to make it more effective, which seems to be what people are asking for. It's not about extending bus lanes.
Thanks, Douglas. Nick?
Yeah, I have got something I want to say on something else later, but I'm sorry if I'm missing something glaringly obvious, but I'm not quite sure what the point of, given what you've just said, and given what Julie's just said, I'm not quite sure what the point of Joe's amendment would be. I'd thought I heard him say that he wanted to rule out the 24-hour bus lanes as a consultation option. I think I heard that. If I didn't, Joe, I apologise. But could somebody please explain to me what Joe's proposal actually means? Does it mean that if we pass it, it would cut off the potential income source from the combined authority?
Thanks. I'll ask Joe to clarify. Obviously come out of it too clear. That's why we're kind of trying to get.
Thank you for the chance to clarify. Yes, so a couple of points have been raised. Firstly, I quite deliberately didn't mention red routes or red paint. They are, as Douglas says, a separate issue and relate to enforcement. And you know, I'm certainly happy for the Transport Committee to go away and consult on turning the yellow into red with the same hours, so that the existing provisions can be properly enforced. That is a perfectly reasonable thing for them to consult on. It is specifically whether we grant capital approval for funding of 12-hour bus lanes, and the proposal here leaves that open. If the effect of my amendment, as I understand it, is that if it is passed, then if the Transport Committee want to go ahead with 12-hour bus lanes, they'd have to come back for the capital approval for it, because the capital approval sits with us, consultation and whatnot sits with them. And I think it is quite reasonable for us to say, well, look, it has been some months since that petition came, and those businesses are still concerned about the future viability of their lunchtime trade. And for us to say here, we do not want to fund, in terms of the funding, the capital funding, we do not want to fund 12-hour bus lanes, or at least we do not want to fund at this stage, or make provision for the funding at this stage, 12-hour bus lanes. If Transport want to press on with 12-hour bus lanes, they can come back to us and say, look, can we have this capital approval? But as it stands, if my amendment is passed, they would not have the approval to do that that part of the scheme. They could still do the whole scheme. I'm supportive of the rest of the scheme. They'd be able to go ahead and do that. They'd be able to consult on all the other options that exist within that, but they would have to come back to us for capital approval for the 12-hour bus lanes, because I think that is a proportionate, if much delayed, response to the petition that came to full council some months ago saying, please, you know, I've sunk my life savings to this business, please don't destroy it, please don't take it out from under my feet. I think that's a proportionate and reasonable response that gives the traders some, the first indication that actually maybe we as a council are on their side. So that's why I'm proposing this amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll bring Councillor Gilcott in a minute. Just for me, my understanding, so I mean, I think there may be a bit, we haven't got anybody from Transport and Highways here. My understanding was that the money was to draw up the options that have already been agreed in consultation, i.e. some of the hotspots, some of the junctions, some of the building work, and to make that process. This is not about the bus lane issue that's ongoing between Aberdale and Ecclesall Road. Now, that's my understanding. I'll bring Councillor Gilcott, who's the co-chair of that. But if not, I mean, I'm quite comfortable with that we kind of take a view on this, with find out the finite technicalities. I think that's the difference between being the SR and being the accountable body, if you want, to having the committees where you be able to get into the nuts and bolts of this stuff. So, Julie?
Thank you, Chair. My only comment would be that as this is about securing the funding from the MCA to draw it down, if we are altering the terms under which we are seeking that funding, will that affect the amount of funding that we are getting? And I would really like to understand that point before we took a vote on anything, because I genuinely don't know whether if we alter that, whether it will affect what the MCA say to us in terms of the amount of funding we can have. And that is a genuine concern.
If members, to try and get through this, if members are comfortable, I mean, we can take a vote if one wants to, but I'll bring the monitoring officer in first before I put out forward. Gillian.
Thank you, Chair. I think because what you've got in front of you is approval as part of the capital programme. You can decide you don't want to approve it, but you can't amend. I would suggest you can't amend it because you don't know what the consequences of amending it are. You don't have enough information in front of you. You have got the chair of the Transport Committee here, so you know you could suggest that the chair takes that action back and with your thoughts and comments, but I would suggest then that this is not, it's actually omitted rather than approved as amended.
Thanks, and I was just about to suggest that through that impasse, I think the Transport Regen Committee meets very shortly, and that we could bring into the CMT, is that right? I've got the chair looking at me with glee, so whether that's right. But obviously this could do with more technical information, I think, before we make a move on it. As is, we don't know what the consequences of that amendment would be. I'll just bring Mick and I'll bring you back in, Joe. Mick?
I was going to make a suggestion that we delay making a decision until we get the information that's required, and then call an urgency committee to make the final decision on it. I don't know whether if that's helpful or not. Joe's given me a sort of warrior. It's meant to be helpful, Joe.
If I may, thank you, Mick. I mean, I appreciate you trying to be helpful. I mean, look, what I'm trying to do here is give some assurance to the businesses on those roads. So I actually don't want to delay the decision. I don't want to delay the capital approval. I think overall it's a good scheme. Overall, those bus corridors need this money and this work. The point is that the 12-hour bus lanes, if we put off the approval, that doesn't really give assurance any sooner. If you are trying to meet me halfway, what I would ask you to find a way to do is to say, look, this is when we can give those businesses some assurance. This is the timetable. If we can give the businesses on those roads some assurance they're not going to have their lunchtime trade curtailed, and we can do it, you know, by the end of August or end of July or something, then that would be meeting me halfway. Otherwise, I would like to put my amendment to the vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Sorry, I've got Douglas and Julie. Douglas, then bring Julie to...
I was just going to say that, I mean, given there is a specific proposal on here, if we delay it, it has a knock-on effect on the whole issue of the transport planners' work, but also delays in getting funding in from the MCA, and of course, delays in funding means less funding overall. And I think, from what Councillor Otten said, we've got agreement that doesn't want to delay the capital approval. I'm sure that Joe's points are noted, but I think it will be helpful for everyone to actually have a firm decision, but also to allow the substantive discussion to be in the control of the relevant committee, either the Transport Committee, rather than it being effectively predetermined here.
Thanks, Philip. Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I suggest that I take it away? I know the feeling of the meeting, the comments and concerns, and get a meeting of my committee together very quickly with the relevant officers to just address this specific point, so that we can come back to you with a view from the committee. Would that be okay? Because I get your point. I think it's only right and proper that, you know, people who have been involved in consultation do get some timely and proper feedback from us in relation to where we're going with this. I don't have any problem with doing that.
Okay, I'll take that, Chair. Thank you.
Siobhan?
Yeah, basically, I think if you withdraw that, given what you said, but, you know, I think we made the point that businesses are putting off decisions like whether to extend a lease or not, because of uncertainty about the nature of trade they may have, and it's a real issue that has to be resolved. Whichever way we go, obviously we've got strong opinions. We've got petitions. We did have a local election results in both those wards, with a clear campaigns that both winning candidates had in terms of those red lines and their durations, at least. Thank you, Chair.
No, thanks for that, and thanks for that, members. I think what we can take away from today's debate and discussion around this article is a learning example of how we kind of go forward as well in various issues that we bring to this committee, and so we can take that. So with Julie's suggestion on that item, can we agree the rest of the proposal? Sorry, Martin, I forgot you had all of this, and sorry, but Martin, to you, sorry, and then I'll bring this to an end. Okay.
It was a couple of questions on the John Lewis building. So there's a couple of items in there. With regards to the item, it's called Barker's Pool car park demolition. So this is making the decision about funding if a decision on demolition was taken. It says it will be funded by prudential borrowing. Just a technical question. Can you borrow money against an asset that you're planning to destroy? I know local authority accounts are different, but I've never heard of that one before.
I think it's because it's viewed as part of the whole of the heart of the city investment. So the whole, you know, all the blocks, the whole area is a single development area as far as the local authority is concerned, and how we've moved towards financing it, including the tax incremental financing that we retain the business rate. That's going to pay, the whole model based around it's a whole development site, and there'll be, a lot of what we've done has involved already, some demolition of parts and then rebuilding, because the whole site's going to be redeveloped. So it's all been categorised as one asset under construction, if you like, in technical terms, and that's how we're moving it forward. So it's one site for development at the moment that's getting split off into smaller blocks as each finishes and becomes complete. But overall, the whole site is viewed as one asset that is being enhanced and developed, and this is just part of the work that you've got to do in order to be able to do that. So yeah, in the circumstances, yeah, that would be a usual practice for us.
Thanks for that. So then if I look at that item combined and the other one about asbestos removal, so I'm not questioning the fact that you need to remove asbestos, but John Lewis paid the city £5 million to get out the lease and exit the city with their tail between their legs. If we're borrowing money to change the store and demolish part of it, where's the £5 million gone?
It's a bit of a technical in that the money we received was classed as revenue funding, which we can use in other ways more to manage other elements of this programme. So there will also be revenue impacts of this programme when we start leasing stores and where we still own Blocks D, etc. So there's just different ways of using that funding, and revenue funding is, I don't know, is more, shall we say, scarce, as you've seen from, you know, Ryan's reports. It's the revenue side of the budget. So at this point, managing the different pressures that can come out of the Heart of the City programme, the decision was you take that we can manage some of the revenue pressures that might come out from where we're starting to rent out and mitigate some of the risks of that, where blocks finish and then they cease to become operational. So then we're collecting rents, but you might have void periods, etc. So there's different elements of this, the whole programme. So there are also revenue implications of it. So at this point, it was the revenue funding was felt more, it's more judicious to use it in the managing the revenue elements of the Heart of the City programme than putting it back into the capital elements, if you see what I mean. It's a much more, it's wider programme that has revenue implications. So it's better to use that funding to manage those elements rather than put that back into the capital and lose that ability to manage those revenue risks and problems that you could come across. I don't know if that's a...
So I think I partially understand that. So we're not necessarily spending that £5 million on the John Lewis building. We might be using it to plug revenue gaps elsewhere in the Heart of the City project. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, I think it's going to be about managing that whole programme in the round. So yeah, there's decisions that are made around the best use of that funding in order to manage that.
Just to be clear in answer to your question, what I asked the team to do is to optimise the use of the money that we've got available to us. So Damien's absolutely right. If we are technically able to use borrowing to undertake the demolition, if that is approved, planning and so on, that frees up the revenue money that John Lewis paid to us to deal with other pressures in the wider scheme. It's simply a question for me of optimising the use of the money in the most efficient way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay. No more questions, comments. If not, with the element with... Oh, sorry, Mick.
Sorry about that, Chair. It's comments, really. Despite, it's largely good news, this. So I just wanted to welcome, wearing my local councillor's hat, the money that's been spent on Cordwell Drive, and say thank you to the local residents for participating in the process of choosing the equipment. The other is the acquisition of the 28 flats from a developer, which, I mean, Councillor Wood was chair of housing, I believe, at the time, from a developer that has gone bust, and they were just sat there basically rotting. So we decided that it was a good idea to acquire them, which is particularly welcome. And wearing my co-chair of Children and Families Committee, the investment in the SEND provision in the two schools that is it's desperately needed in some instances. And just a plug for Pitworth School, it's in a real state, isn't it, Pitworth? And we do need to have a real consideration about its long-term future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick, and without getting into it too deep, with Pitworth being in my ward, we really need to have a discussion about a lot of the schools and the building that's going on in my ward as well. An extra 1,000 households is putting real pressure on a lot of local services. But yes, largely good news, with the suggestion from Julie about the item regarding the movement of travel for the active travel. Can we agree this report? Agreed. Thank you. Thanks, Damien. We move to the final report with 20 minutes remaining in time, so I'm in budget. We come to item 14, the continued sport volunteer run libraries. Is anyone moving this report? If not, I think it's most contained. Is there any questions, comments on this report? Richard?
Thank you, Chair. Under the recommendations, recommendation B talks about approves the establishment of a fund and a distribution. Is it possible we could add the word urgent in front of distribution, if it's minded to approve this? Because the voluntary library sector do a tremendous service for the city, and they've been left literally up a creek without a paddle over this. If my understanding is correct, they haven't had any monies since the beginning of the new financial year. I don't understand why, but let's park the past, move forward, and get them the money quick if we're minded to.
Thanks, Richard. Julie?
Yeah, I'm happy to support Richard with that, and it's just a wider question for me. Is there any update on where we are with the library reviews? I don't know if you'll be able to give us any update on that, Richard, as the chair of the committee, or has that work yet to be started? Just for information, thank you.
I've had discussions with the officers. I'm not sure where we're at with it yet. I've actually got a meeting tomorrow.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard, and I'm sure we'll get an update on that. So, with the report and the word urgent in front of, can we agree that report? Agreed. Thank you. Can I thank members for the time today, officers, etc. And we will see you soon. Thank you.